Greetings YouTube. Today we're going to be telling you how to set up your very first model in your FrSky radio. I told you I'd put this video up, so today we're going to set up a basic 4 or 5 channel aircraft in that radio, and you're going to see that it's much easier than people thinks it is. I just wanted to go over something first concerning these radios. FrSky does make several different radios, and I just wanted to let you know that they all, if they're running OpenTX in them, they work exactly the same. So no matter what radio you decide to go with, it's going to be the exact same procedure to set up a radio with an aircraft. The only difference is between the radios, and I have two sitting before us right now. I have the X10S, which is kind of basically an upgraded version of the Taranis. It's got a better screen. It's all in color. The knobs and the buttons are a little bit different. It's got a little scroll wheel here for getting through your menus and stuff. And the Taranis just has buttons. You can see the buttons on the left and on the right of the screen. Those are what you click to get through and navigate through your menus. But they both work identical. And the X7 that they have out there, or the Q7, works identical to these both radios, but it has kind of the scroll wheel and the buttons like the X10S does. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up a model in the Taranis here today, and kind of go through what some of those numbers mean and what some of the functions are in it to kind of help you get up in the air as quick as possible. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to turn the radio on.
Welcome to OpenTX.
And then you're going to want to short press this menu button up here in the upper left. And what that does is that brings you to your model screen. Now what we want to do is we want to select an open model here, and all of these are open because I did wipe this radio out for the purpose of doing the videos. But we want to select that number 1 as our first model. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this enter button on the right hand side, the lower right, and we're going to long press it. And it says create model. So here's what we're going to do. This is going to enter us into a template to kind of set it up with basic functions and stuff to kind of get us going. So we're going to go ahead and hit create model, and it's going to ask us what kind of model are we setting up. Are we setting up a fixed wing aircraft? Are we setting up a like a flying wing, or are we setting up a like a drone multi-rotor? Well, you use these plus and negative buttons to navigate to the type of aircraft that you're setting up. And then the system's going to ask you a few questions. Today we're going to set up a fixed wing aircraft. So we're going to scroll to that, make sure it's highlighted with the arrow, press enter. And it's going to ask you, has your model got an engine? Well, yes. Don't hit enter, because a lot of people think because it says yes, you hit enter to move on. You don't. You just hit the page button over here, the middle button on the left hand side. Hit page. And what it asks you too is what channel is it on? And if you look, it says down there channel 1, so that's what it's going to assign that throttle to. So we'll hit the page button since we'll get past that, and it'll ask, has your model got ailerons? Yes. 1 channel. In other words, are your ailerons on both wings attached to a Y harness and then going to the receiver on a single channel? Well, let's just assume it is, since most of the basic models out there do fly that way. Some of them do use separate channels for the ailerons. It'll use 1 channel for one side and another channel for another. But today we're going to assume that we are just using a single channel. And as you can see right there, the radio is going to assign those ailerons to channel number 2. Again, to move to the next question, we're going to hit the page button. And it'll ask, has your model got flaps? Well, I wasn't going to do this. I was going to go ahead and leave that alone. But today I'm going to say yes, because I want to show you how to set up flaps in a model, because there's a lot of really cool airplanes out there these days, and they seem to be installing flaps on most of them. So it probably behoove you to hear about how to set those up in your aircraft and get them functioning. So we're going to go ahead and hit the enter button, because it is highlighted as no. So we'll hit the enter button, and we're going to say it's running on a Y harness as well on 1 channel. So we'll scroll down to the 1 channel. And what the radio is automatically doing is it's going to assign those flaps to the 7th channel on your receiver. So we'll hit enter. So we're yes, one channel, channel 7, and we'll page over. And then it's going to say, has your model got air brakes? Well, most of them don't. So we'll just leave it at that and hit no. And then it's going to tell you, okay, let's make sure that we've got your rudder and your elevon configured correctly. Elevator is going to be on one channel. It usually always is, and so is rudder. But it's got the little picture over there that shows the rudder being on channel 4 and your elevator being on channel 3. That is normal. So we're going to go ahead and say, yep, that's it. Let's go ahead and hit page again. And we're going to look at that, and it's going to show us number 1 channel is throttle, 2 is aileron, elevators number 3, rudders number 4, and flaps are going to be set and connected to channel 7 of your receiver. And then it says long press the enter button to confirm. The enter button, long press, and there we go. So now we have set up the basic functions in this radio for this model. So now we have a template that's kind of preset some of the values in this radio already to get us going. Now, when you're doing these models, if you want to view any of the pages concerning any of the models that you have on here, say if you have, if you want to choose a second model or a third model or whatever, you know, you choose those models by scrolling down to the plane you want to fly. When it's set up, you long press enter and you click again to select the model. Well, the selected model, the settings in the radio currently, will always have that little asterisk next to them. So that's what we're set to right now to fly, is that specific model. So because of that, any page we go to concerning that model will always correspond with whatever that asterisk is next to. So we're going to go into those settings, and the way we do that is we're going to, as long as we're on this page, we can hit page, and that would be the first page of setting up this model. Now here's where you could name the model. Now if you want to name the model, and let's just say we're going to press enter, which is going to allow us to go ahead and spell out with letters or numbers whatever it is we want to fly, and let's just call this one a Cub. Like we're going to fly a Cub, so we want to name this model Cub. So we're going to go ahead and scroll with the plus and the minus buttons to the letters we want, and if you want to capitalize it, you long press the enter button, and that makes it capital and moves to the next letter. So then we're going to go to U. We don't want to capital that. And then to go to the next letter, we short press enter, and we go to B. Short press. Okay, and once we get there, we'll hit exit, which highlights the whole thing again, which means now we can scroll up and down throughout this menu with the plus and minus to set some of the other settings. You have model image, so if you've got any images stored on your SD card, you can click on that and scroll through that model image, and then when you're on that selected model on the main screen, it'll show a picture of that airplane as well. But you can go down to timer. For some of the people that fly electric airplanes, timers are a good idea because you don't want to overdraw your battery. You can damage your battery. I personally set all mine by default to 5 or 6 minutes for the first flight, and then I bring it back down and test the battery to find out what voltage is in it, so I know whether or not I need to subtract minutes or I need to add minutes so I can get, you know, the maximum flight time out of the battery without damaging it. So let me show you how to set up that. So what you do, if you want to set up a specific line, you just hit enter. And right now it says off. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to hit enter again. When it's flashing, we can change it. We're going to turn it. You can either turn it on to where it's on all the time when you're on an airplane, or you can select a specific function that will turn it on. So what I usually like to do is I always set my airplanes to a specific switch. So if you flip a switch on that airplane, then that timer will start. I usually use this back switch back here. So when I flip that switch, the timer starts. If I flip it forward again, the timer stops. But watch what happens when I just flip that switch when that's blinking. And here's what's really cool about this radio too. When you flip the switch, what you've done is you've assigned that switch to that timer. Now what you do is you exit to get it to stop blinking, You can put your switch back, it won't matter now. So every time I flip that switch now, it's going to start that timer. Now what I can do is set the countdown timer by taking the plus or the minus, moving over to the timer. I can either go to seconds, I can go to minutes or hours. Well, we're going to go to minutes, so we're going to hit enter. And we're going to use the plus to go up to about 6 minutes or so. And we're going to hit exit. Okay, now that timer is set to 6 minutes, so it will count down from 6 minutes when we're flying once we flip that switch. And what I like to do is you keep hitting enter till the whole line is highlighted again. That'll allow you to move up and down back through these lines again. I want to do minute call. So when it's flying, the radio will literally tell me, okay, you have 4 minutes left, you have 3 minutes left, so then when it gets to a certain point, I can prepare to land or whatever. So to select that, you just hit the enter button and it puts a check mark there. Countdown, you select it again. I can either have it on silent, I can have it on to where it'll beep, I can have a voice. I usually pick voice. And when you pick voice, the radio automatically goes to the sound files and picks up the timer voice for this specific timer. So it will announce to you, you have 5 minutes left, you have 4 minutes left, and 10 seconds, and timer expired. It'll tell you all that stuff. So I go to voice, and then I'll scroll down to the next. Timer 2 I really don't need for anything. Let me get past that. Another thing I like to do too is I like to do extended limits and I like to do extended trims. And here's the reason I like to do that. A lot of radios out there, once you run out of trims, when you're clicking these trims from side to side, listen.
Maximum trim reached.
When you get to that point in most radios, that's as far as you can go to trim a control surface. And if you're flying in the air and you've got something mechanically set up a little goofy, and you need to trim more to get that plane to stabilize, it would be nice to go a little farther than that. Well, with this radio, by setting the extended limits and trims, you can. Once that radio announces what you just heard, you can let up on it, hit it again, and that radio will just continue to trim in whatever direction you're pushing that knob. That's why I choose to do that, because it kind of keeps me safe in the air.
Center.
So let's see what else we got here. All right, so now here's another thing that's important too, is your mode. Mode has to do with the type of receiver you're flying with. For some of the older FrSky receivers, what they were using is the D8. D8 is what you would have to use for some of the older D-series receivers for FrSky. But we're flying the X series, which are 16-channel receivers, so you want it on D16. If it's on D16, that'll allow you to fly the new X series receivers, like the X8R or anything else that they've got, everything except the D-series receivers. So you want to keep it on D16. The other one that they have too is LR12. LR stands for long range. They do have some long range receivers out there. They got the L9R. This is the setting you'd want to set it on for long range. But most of the stuff you're going to fly is going to be on the 16-channel receivers, the X series. And even if you buy the 4-channel receivers, if they're the X series, you still fly those on the D16. So that's important to make sure that you keep that there. You don't really need to change anything here. Everything's good there. And then you have this setting here. This one will allow you to bind the receiver, and it will allow you to range check your aircraft too. With FrSky, there's no holding a button in the back of the transmitter and flipping it on while you're trying to bind an aircraft. You just do it right here. Like right there, I have bind selected. I just hit enter. And I always choose the first one, which is channels 1 through 8, to turn the telemetry on, because in the FrSky receivers, they come with built-in telemetry, and that's pretty cool. But to turn it on, I can choose to turn it on or off, but I turn it on. So if we turn it on, as soon as we do that, listen. Once the radio is doing that, it's in bind mode. Then you can bind that receiver. So in order to bind the receiver, and I bind most of mine out of the aircraft when I first set up the model like this, I usually choose to do a lot of them on the bench for a reason. To bind it, your bind button is the FS button. The FS button is located over here on the left in a little hole. See it right there where my thumb is on the left hand side? You've got to press that button down and hold it down just like this while you connect battery power to that receiver. When you connect battery power to that receiver, the LED lights just below this pen are going to begin to blink. There's a green and a red one. Once they begin blinking, you can immediately let off the bind button, disconnect your power source from the receiver, and then you can hit exit and exit out of that bind. Then your radio is bound to that receiver and it's ready to fly. The reason I do them on the bench is because by the time you mount these things in the airplane, sometimes it's hard to get to that little button there to press it down and hold it while connecting a battery to this thing, to get it to bind. There's just a lot of stuff in the way sometimes. And plus it's kind of a safety thing. I don't have my arms all wrapped around the aircraft trying to do multiple things to it and risk a potential prop strike if it happens to fire up the motor as soon as it binds. Which is another thing. If you happen to bind it and it is in the aircraft, please make sure you remove the propeller, because if something's set wrong, that engine's going to start and it's going to cause some damage to you or other things. So just keep that in mind concerning that. Some of the other stuff here, you have failsafe mode, which I only like to set after I get the plane up and running, because sometimes you'll have to reverse the throttle channel or something in here to make it work properly, and in that case then you can set the failsafe stuff, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But that's pretty much how you get this thing started for setting up. So what we're going to do now is I went back too far if you're on this, like I said. We're going to go to the next page. Next page is for setting up like helicopters and stuff. We're not going to worry about that. This page here is for flight modes. We're not going to worry about that because we're just doing basic setups right now. This is inputs. So inputs is something that I usually don't mess with a whole lot except for one function. These numbers here that you see here on each channel, it says throttle 100, aileron 100, elevator 100, and rudder 100. That 100 means that is the actual movement that this radio output is going to produce to move those servos. It's going to move them all 100%. 100% output to the servos. I don't really like to mess with this page too much unless I'm putting a number in there which they call expo. Expo is a specific setting you can put on an airplane for certain control surfaces to kind of tame it down a little. Sometimes they're a little twitchy in the air. Like if you go to turn left or turn right with your ailerons, if it moves too quick and too hard and too fast, you can go in there and tone that down by putting a little expo in there and slowing that control surface down so it's not so touchy. And the same thing with the elevator. I usually only put expo in my elevators and my ailerons, because when you're coming in for a landing and you go to make small corrections with that elevator as you're coming in, if it's too touchy, it's going to want to, your airplane's going to want to kind of balloon up and down all the time real fast. So if you put some expo in there, that'll kind of slow that down for you. So let's go ahead and do that, because I usually like to start with expo about 30% on aileron and elevator to kind of tame the beast, so to speak. So to select anything that we want to do here, we need to move to that specific control surface, and we see ailerons here. That's one we're going to change. So I use my plus and minus to go down to aileron, long press enter, and then short press for edit. And then I'm going to scroll down here where it says expo. Okay, I'm going to go to the 0 right next to it, hit enter, and remember you can only make changes to it if it's flashing. And we're going to add expo. We're not going to go negative, we're going to go positive. So we go to positive 30. This should soften it up a little bit so it's not so twitchy in the air. Hit enter again, which shuts that off. And then we're going to hit exit again, and we're back to that page. Now we see that our ailerons are at 100% power output with exponential being at 30. So we're going to go to elevator now and do the same thing. long press, click edit with the enter button, scroll down with the minus tab to expo to the 0, hit enter again so it's flashing, hit the plus button, go to 30. And this is a good starting point. Hit enter again. 30 is a good starting point for just about any aircraft out there. If it turns out that it's too soft when you're flying it, you can always bring the aircraft back down and decrease that number. If it turns out you don't have enough expo, that it's still a little too twitchy with small movements on those sticks, you can add expo. I mean, I've had to add expo as high as 80% before. But we're going to get out of this page. Okay, now that's page 5 of 13 for setting up your model. So this is inputs. Remember, on the inputs page, really the only thing you need to do, especially as a new user, is just use it specifically for setting up expo. Now over here at the next page is called mixer. That's where everything happens. Now look how the radio assigned everything. You see it assigned channel 1, engine, 2 is aileron, 3, elevator, 4 is rudder, and then you go all the way to channel 7, it set the SA switch to your flaps. Now, you wonder what the SA switch is. Well, they label them SA. So it's using this for 3 position flaps. So this would be all the way up, this would be halfway down, this would be all the way down. Well, you can really assign any switch you want to that. You don't have to use that switch if you don't want to. I personally like to use my right slider. Why? Because then I have variable flaps. I can set them. Those flaps will continuously move as I'm moving this to any percentage that I want. So I can go from 1% to 100% flaps if I want to. Over here I can't. Well, on a 3-position switch, I've only got no flaps, 50% flaps, or 100% flaps. But I like it variable depending on what the wind's doing out there. And plus, you know, I've got this thing right here as I'm flying my airplane. It's right here at my finger all the time, so I can move it if I need to. Just kind of rock it around, you know. So let me show you how to change that switch if you wanted to do something like that. And you can change it to any switch you want to. So what we do is we use the minus to scroll down to channel 7, which is flaps. Long press the enter. Click edit. You're going to go down to source, which is SA. Again, SA is that switch they assigned it to. And we're going to hit enter, because remember, you can only make changes when it's flashing. And if I move that right slider, all I got to do is just move it. And it'll automatically select right slider as the source. Then I can hit enter again to stop the flashing, and it's done. So I can back out of that, and now my flaps are set to the right slider. So, and you're looking at it up there at the top of the screen. See that little bar moving back and forth? I'm moving that right slider, and you can see that it has been set to that right slider. So this screen right here shows you the channel setup for your receiver, how you should be plugging everything in. And on your receivers, it's listed. It doesn't tell you throttle or anything, but it does have like 1 through 8. So if your radio says your throttle's on channel 1, then you want to plug your throttle into channel 1. Ailerons 2, elevator 3, rudder 4, and then the 7th channel is where you would be plugging your flaps in. You can also change that and move your flaps to any other channel you want to if you'd like to. But let's talk for a minute about this screen. What this screen is it looks similar to the screen we were just on, the input screen, but it is a lot different. Although the inputs are providing 100% power to those servos from this radio, sometimes we don't want that specific control surface to move that much, or sometimes it's bottoming out the servo, before it gets to 100, which could damage the servo. So the best thing you can do here is, like, say ailerons. If your ailerons move too much, if you've got too much control from those ailerons, you can go in here by, like I said, long pressing on the ailerons, clicking edit, and you're down here to ailerons. You can go down here to where it says the weight. Weight is the amount of throw that control surface is going to move. You can hit enter. Once it's flashing, you can make changes. And a good place to start for probably a new pilot would be setting this on ailerons anywhere between, I'd say, 50 and 70. So let's just set it to 70, just for the sake of showing you. And we hit enter. All right, so the ailerons have been set to 70% of their maximum throw. So, you know, and if you like to fly at 100%, that's perfectly fine, but just make sure it's not bottoming out your servo. It's going to cause damage to your servos by moving them 100%. Sometimes you may need to back that down 5 or 10%. Just remember that. And the same thing usually goes for elevators. So let's hit exit, and that brings us back to that menu. And we're going to go down here to elevator. You're going to long press, hit edit, and you can go back down here to the 100 because you don't want the elevator to throw a whole lot either, unless you're a 3D pilot or something. Say we're going to bring it down to 70. These are good starting points. If you have to make adjustments after your first flight, you can do that. But these are good starting points for setting up a new airplane. So we'll set it down here to 70. Hit enter again to get it to stop flashing. And then hit your exit button to return to the main menu. Now, the mixer, if you look at rudder right there, it's at 100%. I personally like to keep my rudder at 100%. Some of the tail draggers out there and stuff, they won't turn very good on runways and stuff unless that rudder's really moving around. So I try to keep them at 100% unless the servo's bottoming out too much. And if that is the case, you can always, long press enter, click edit, go down to this 100, and you can change this number, lower it down a little bit so the servo's not throwing so far, bottoming out mechanically that servo. And you can usually tell that when you go to move the control surface with a stick where the bottom out point is, and then if it has any more stick still left in it, nothing's happening to that servo, you need to tone that number down a little bit to protect your servo. But in most cases, I get away with 100 on that rudder. But that's pretty much it. Right now, that airplane will fly. But what you need to do is you need to set this up like this first. Get your receiver in your airplane. Plug all of your control surfaces into those selected areas like it shows here. 1 being throttle, 2 aileron, 3 elevator, 4 rudder. Number 7 will be your flaps on a Y cable, just like your ailerons are. And then you need to power up the airplane to make sure all of your control surfaces are moving in the right direction. If your control surfaces are not moving in the right direction, what you do is you're going to go to the next page, which shows outputs. Outputs, I don't know why they changed it to the term outputs. It used to be called servos. But outputs is your outputs, and it lists it by channel, 1 through 8. So what you're going to want to do is whatever one you need to change, like say you go to move your ailerons and they're moving in the opposite direction. That's bad. I mean, you could easily crash that airplane. But what I want you to look at over here is, they don't tell you, but these little arrows right here next to this 100 on the right hand side of this 100, those little arrows are the direction that channel is set to. So you know your ailerons are on channel 2, but say they're backwards and you want to flip them around. You just select channel 2 with the enter button, and when you do that, you can use the plus and the minus button to move back and forth. So you minus all the way over to that arrow, and it says direction. It tells you that, it highlights that once you move to the arrow. You just press enter once, and the arrow flips the other way. So now your control surfaces are going to move the opposite direction of what they were moving when you were moving the sticks before. And you can do that with any of the channels on there. You can do that with your throttle. You can do that with your rudder or elevator, whatever it may be. Even your flaps. If your flaps are moving in the wrong direction, you would scroll down to number 7. Go over to that little arrow that says direction. Change it so it's flipped the other way. Now that channel has been reversed. The first thing that I want to show you here too is this category right here. These are actually sub trims. A lot of people use the sub trims to recenter their trims again, because if you trim way out like this, if you've got to trim one direction or the other, the bar slider on your screen, on your main screen, is going to show you're either trimmed way to the right or way to the left, to get that plane to fly stable. Well, you can go in there and you can set sub trims if you wanted to with the by hitting enter and by moving this number up or down to recenter those servos. through the radio. But I personally don't really even worry about that, because what we did on that first page is we selected extended trims and extended limits. So this doesn't really matter. But what I will tell you is this: if you find yourself having to trim a lot, way farther than you should be from center, then you need to probably trim that plane to where it needs to be. Look at where it's at, and then mechanically adjust that aircraft, because you've probably got something set up where you got a control horn in the wrong place or something. So you're going to have to go ahead and mechanically set that plane to try to at least get these trims close to center as possible. And the reason for that is you'll find yourself, if it's mechanically out of whack, it'll turn sharper in one direction than it will the other, and that really affects things like elevator and rudder. You'll find out that you're able to steer the plane, real hard to the right, but you can barely turn it to the left, or vice versa. So you gotta want to make sure your plane's mechanically sound, at first before you get your first flight in. So double check everything on the bench. Make sure to do everything with the prop off the aircraft so you don't have any injuries or any damage to any equipment or anything, because that happens a lot more often than you think it does. But what we've done here is we've basically set up our first aircraft, at least to get it on the bench, fire it up, try it out, and see what happens. And like I said, make sure you double check all of your control surfaces. Make sure they're going in the right directions. If they're not, and you're on this main screen, you just hit this menu button once. And know this: if you hit the menu button too long, you go into the radio settings. If that happens, just hit exit, tap the menu button again. As long as you've got the asterisk next to the plane you're wanting to fly, you can page over to your outputs page, which used to be called servos, and you can change that servo direction by going over here to this arrow, and by hitting enter, and then using your minus button to get over to that arrow, and then you can change the direction of that specific channel, whichever one you're having the issue with. So just keep that in mind. You can always do that. That's pretty much the basic setup for getting your airplane in the air. Let me see if I forgot anything else here real quick. Flaps are going to be set to variable. That's going to be fine. I usually have mine to where they're set to where that slider, when that slider's all the way up, my flaps are up. When it's all the way down, they're all the way down. So, and you will do that, setting your flaps up. If you do it on the slider, if you find your flaps are bottoming out before that slider's all the way down, you're going to want to go into that channel setting over in the mixer page, like I showed you with those other ones, and you're going to want to tone that down a little by taking it from 100 down to a number to where that servo's not bottoming out. Even if you got to go all the way down to 60 or 50, just make sure that servo's not bottoming out, because it does cause damage. Make sure to hit subscribe and like if you learned anything here today, and stay tuned for some more videos.